Second main point of the book is the things which are the seven churches, and we are going to move very quickly. The seven churches were seven little churches in Asia Minor with the problems spelled out here for correction. Churches today may be characterized by the same practical and doctrinal problems. In fact, students, at any point in church history, you could probably find all seven kinds of churches. Underscore in your mind, at least, it was not John's purpose to present a panorama of church history by means of these seven. You will find that it's common among prophecy teachers to say the seven churches represent seven stages of church history. And there is an amazing parallel in the seven churches and stages of church history, but they don't all work. For instance, it's common to say the church of Thyatira represented the Middle Ages. It could hardly be said that their good deeds were more than the first. Good night, they just got worse and worse. Nor is it accurate to say Sardis pictured the Reformation. How could that be? Above all, and this is the main reason why I really, I oppose it because it's too figurative, but the other reason is because it does away with the idea of imminence. If you say these, it's amazing, the prophecy teachers who teach imminence will teach that these seven churches are seven stages of church history. They're destroying their own position because you got to go through all seven stages before Christ can come. And how can you believe in imminence if you have to go through these seven stages of church history? You follow what I'm saying? And I've never had anybody say that. It just suddenly dawned on me as I was thinking about this. Wait. If you believe this, you're destroying the doctrine of imminence. You've got to go through all seven stages, and we're now in the age of Laodicea. Of course, interestingly, everybody thinks they're now in the Laodicean age because you can always find deadness in the church, but I don't believe it. In other words, I do not believe this is a panorama of church history. I shouldn't confess this, but when I was a student at Dallas Seminary, the philosophy of the church history department was that it was a panorama of church history, and so I just don't agree with that. I'm sorry. Each message essentially has the same pattern. There are variations, but basically this pattern. Address or greeting, a description of the Lord Jesus, which looks back to the vision of chapter 1. I want you to get to the point here, just a second. When each letter begins with a description of Christ, looking back to what was in chapter 1, a description of Christ, and what the description of Christ is relates to that church. That description has something to do with the church. So it's very interesting that it's connected to chapter 1. Number 3, there's a commendation normally. Fourth, a criticism, complaint, or condemnation normally. There is a warning or threat, an exhortation, and then a promise in each one of these. So let's start with the church of Ephesus. If you ask me to candidate at the church of Ephesus, I say, yeah, that's a great church. That's a good church. Look at the description of it, if you will. Start with verse 2. I know your deeds and your toil and perseverance, and that you cannot endure evil men. And you put to the test those who call themselves apostles, and they are not. You found them to be false, and you have perseverance and have endured for my name's sake, have not grown weary. Boy, that's a good church. I'd say, yeah, I'll take that church at any time. But I have this against you. You've lost your first love, and that's why I say in the notes, the church at Ephesus was characterized by orthodoxy without love. Contrast this with Ephesians 1:15. Contrast this with Ephesians 1:15. This is a good indication, again, that this is probably written after the apostolic age, Ephesians 1:15. Verse 6. Yet this you do have. This is on the good side of them. You hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. Who are the Nicolaitans? You'll find that there are many people who say, did you notice the makeup of that word? Nicolaitans. Nikao means what in Greek? Nikao. The great goddess of war and victory was Nike. Nikao means to have victory, to overcome. Laos refers to, what does Laos mean? L-A-O-S. People. So they say, these are victors victors over people, this is the clergy. So the Nicolaitans are the professional clergy who are overcoming the people. That's the argument. Well, that's just building on the word. I don't think that that's what it means, but you find good Bible teachers take that, and I'm not putting them down for that, but I don't believe that that's what it's saying. Some say it looks back to Nicholas, one of the first 7, or some call them the first 7 deacons, Nicholas of Acts 6, one of the first 7, or the 7. Some say the first deacons. Nicholas. And strong tradition is in favor of that. Strong tradition says that it's possible that one of these 7 apostatized and became an enemy of the gospel, and that's possible. We really don't know. We really don't know. We aren't sure. But they're characterized by 2 things: licentiousness and idolatry. Just put immorality to shorten it up. Immorality and idolatry. How do you know that? Well, chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. Take a look at chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. But I have a few things against you, because you have there some who hold the teaching of Balaam, who kept teaching Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit acts of immorality. Thus you also have some who in the same way hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans. So the implication is the Nicolaitans taught immorality and idolatry. By the way, are you getting tired? Just stick with it. Hupomone, endurance. Blessed is he who endures to the end. By the way, put here 1 John 5:21, where he warns them to stay away from idols. And you say, whoa, what would that be? Well, this indicates that idolatry was still going on. 1 John 5:21. Let me take one more point, and then we'll... no, it's too early for a break. We can't take a break. One more point, and then some applications. We'll move on to the Church of Smyrna. Who are the overcomers? Perhaps you've heard this debated on this campus. There are 2 huge viewpoints on our campus. One is the overcomers are a special class of Christians. A special class of Christians. Overcoming Christians. And the other is, it's a term for all Christians. It's a term for all Christians. I take the second. I think he's referring to all Christians under the term overcomers. And here's why. Number 1, and basically 2 reasons. Number 1, 1 John 5:4-5, chapter 4, verse 4, Revelation 21, verses 7-8, and John 16:33. So with your kind permission, and even without it, I'd like to turn to 1 John chapter 5. 1 John chapter 5. 1 John 5, verses 4 and 5. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. And who is the one who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God? To me, that sounds like he's describing a believer. Take Revelation 21. Revelation 21, verses 7 and 8. Revelation 21, verses 7 and 8. He who overcomes shall inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But for the cowardly and unbelieving and abominable and murderers, now you get what I'm getting at? The contrast is between overcomers and lost people. He's not saying the special believers and the lost. The contrast is between saved and lost. So I take it that the overcomers is just a term for referring to all of us who believe. We overcome Satan in Jesus Christ. We've overcome the world in the Lord Jesus. The second reason why I take it that he's looking at all believers is the rewards are for all believers. The rewards are for all believers. We will not take the time to look them up, but let me just give the references and you can check that out in your own study. Chapter 2, verse 7. See further, 22:14. I'll read 2:7 very quickly. To him who overcomes, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. In chapter 22, verse 14, all believers will eat of that tree of life. Chapter 2, verse 11, 2:11. See further, chapter 20, verses 6, 14, chapter 21, verse 8. Chapter 3, verse 5. See further, chapter 20, verses 12 and 15. In other words, the rewards that are given in the future for all believers are given to the overcomers. Now, I would assume from that since the overcomers receive that what everybody else is going to give, that the overcomers are the believers. That may be a jump in logic, but I don't know how else to take that. All right, a few lessons. Correct doctrine does not mean one has a love for the Lord. That's a real lesson for Dallas Seminary. Correct doctrine does not mean one has a love for the Lord. We've all seen Christians who can dot every I and cross every T of an extended doctrinal statement and just be as miserable people to be with. You know, they agree with the doctrine, but boy, they don't love the Lord. Correct doctrine does not mean one has a love for the Lord. Chapter 2, verse 2. Then verse 4, verse 6. Number 2. Let me ask you this question, just to have you think a bit. How can you tell there's a departure from the first love? How does it show? Well, in thankfulness, yes. But according to 1 John.
Praise.
No, according to 1 John. What? Love of the brethren. Yeah, that's right. The first indication of lack of love for the Lord is lack of love for the brethren. How do you leave your first? How do you know you leave the first love? Of course, there's lack of thanksgiving, lack of praise. I agree. But the context of 1 John, the lack of love for the brethren, is the first indication of lacking love for the Lord. Number 3. Do not rest on past accomplishments. What a heritage the church at Ephesus had. Just think of that. Founded by Paul, Apollos as a teacher, John, good night. What a heritage. Do not rest on past accomplishments. Chapter 2, verse 5. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen. But just notice the word choice. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen. It's not just departed. They've fallen. They've dropped down. Number 4. To correct a departure from God, we sometimes must go back to where the departure began. To correct a departure from God, we must sometimes go back to where the departure began. A couple of illustrations. Abraham. But here, Genesis 12:8, when he came into the land, he came to Bethel. Remember the tent and the altar. Genesis 12:8, and then 13:3, he went down to Egypt. Where'd he go back? Back to Bethel. That's why the old hymn, Back to Bethel I Must Go. I don't know if you've ever sung that, but there's an old hymn, Back to Bethel I Must Go, and it goes right back to the story of Abraham. Jacob, this is not quite as clear, but Jacob, 28:19, in chapter 35, verse 1. All right, let's go to the church of Smyrna. The church of Smyrna. We're moving up the coast. A couple of ways. If you're on a boat, you may come into Ephesus. You may come into this. That does make a difference. Thank you. It's clear to me here. Right? It's right here. If you're on a ship, you may come into a port right here and then take a bus to Ephesus. Or sometimes what I've done is I've flown into Constantinople and then flown down to Smyrna. This is where you would stay, because there's no city at Ephesus. So you'd stay at Smyrna, which today is Izmir. It's a seaport town. It has an excellent harbor, and there's still people living there. That's why you don't have as many excavations at Izmir or Smyrna. There are some, but if people are living there, you can't excavate. Ephesus, there's nobody living there. So that's why these marvelous, marvelous ruins have been excavated and found. Well, the church was a suffering church, no criticism. We read now in verse 9, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you're rich, and the blasphemy of those who say they are Jews and are not. What does he mean? He means these are unregenerate Jews. These are unregenerate Jews. For proof of that, or not proof, but for indication of that, put Romans 2, 28 and 29. Romans 2, 28 to 29. They are not all Israel who are of Israel. My, how that passage has been used and abused. It means they are not all Jews who say they're Jews. And he goes on to explain that a true Jew is one who believes in the Messiah. But these are unregenerate Jews. And they persecuted Christians. Polycarp gives a very interesting story. Polycarp, remember, now was martyred in 160. And he tells an interesting story about what happened in Smyrna. Here's what he said. The Jews' hostility to the Christians came out in their zeal in setting forth the execution, talking about the execution of a believer. For example, though it was the Sabbath, they gathered wood for the fire in which the martyr was burned. Now remember what the Jews thought of gathering wood on the Sabbath, on Saturday. And yet they were so fervent in their persecution of the believers, they gathered wood for the burning of this martyr. So this is what he's thinking of, the Jews who are a synagogue of Satan in the sense that they're persecuting the church. Do not fear what you're about to suffer, and so on. You're about to have persecution for 10 days. Now here we hit it immediately. Do you take the 10 days as figurative, or do you take it as literal? Since I'm such a literalist, I prefer to take everything I can literally, so I take this as literal. I take it as literal. Let me give us some illustrations. I think it's literal 10 days of intense persecution. If you want an illustration, take the book of Esther. One day, remember, there was one day that they could have wiped out the Jews. Esther 3:13. And that would just be one day of intense persecution. Or if you'd like, Daniel chapter 1, verses 12 and 14. Daniel 1, verses 12 and 14. But the book of Esther is a classic illustration. Just one day. Here go 10 days of intense persecution. You can see that'd be horrible, probably what it is. He says in the end, be faithful unto death. Boy. Be a martyr, in other words. And I'll give you the crown of life. Probably, that's an appositional genitive. What do I mean, students, by an appositional genitive? Crown of life.
That is, which is life.
That, very good. Crown, which is life. The crown, which is life. You have to think here of first of all, be faithful to death, give you a crown, which is life. You can see the contrast. And you have to think like a Jew here. Fiddler on the Roof. Remember Fiddler on the Roof? Life. Remember that song? Well, it doesn't mean just, I'm alive. I'm a breathing mass of flesh. It doesn't mean that. It just means I'm alive and I'm enjoying life. Life. That's what he's talking about. Chaim, life, fullness of life. And so there'll be for those who are put to death, I'll give a crown of fullness of life. That's what that's saying. So he's not talking just about existence, the crown of life. Verse 11. He overcomes shall not be hurt by the second death. You may want to notice Greek students, may with the subjunctive. May with the subjunctive means by no means. By no means. By no means will you be hurt by that second death. Tremendous promise. You can just see, you'll be martyred, crown of life, and you're not going to be hurt by the second death. It all fits together, real life. All right, a few lessons for our lives. First, the description of Christ in verse 8 is an encouragement to suffering saints. The description of Christ in verse 8. You can see how it fits with the book, with the message to Smyrna. The first and last, who was dead and has come to life. Do you see how it all fits together? If you be faithful to death, they give you life. And here is the one who was put to death and has come to life. That's an encouragement to suffering saints. You're getting groggy. I better tell a little story here. This is not a joke. This is a story. True. In Guangzhou, in South China, there was a fellow who was a navigator, single fellow, who feels that you should not be a secret believer. What's this whole idea of being a secret believer? We're supposed to be a city set on a hill. And we're supposed to be light in the world. We'll just be open in your testimony. And that gentleman fearlessly gives the gospel to people in Guangzhou. I don't know how many he's led to the Lord. And he has a Bible study that was taking place in McDonald's, and he knew that the secret police were there because he could hear the cameras. You know, they'd have their Bibles or something, and then underneath they have a camera. They're taking pictures of everybody in the room. And sure enough, one time when he's out of town and somebody else was taking the Bible study, they closed it down, so he just moved to another McDonald's. He's just fearless. You know what he said? Well, the worst they can do is kill me. Wow, you know? What an outlook! And it just blew me off. You know, I didn't even begin to face that. He hadn't even thought about that. But the worst they can do is kill me. Well, that's what he said. Be faithful to death, and that's the point. This idea of who Christ is really a testimony to people who are in suffering nations, you know, and so on. The second lesson. Christ is aware of our sufferings. Christ is aware of our sufferings. Verse 9, I know your tribulation. For Greek students, it's oida. I'm aware of it. I know about it. Oida, I know about it. I know your sufferings. Number 3, I guess. Number 3. I learned to count in Hinckley, Minnesota. Number 3. Persecution may be in the form of financial reprisal. Persecution may be in the form of financial reprisal. Chapter 2, verse 9. I know your tribulation and your poverty. Your patokos. Even though you're believers, you may suffer for that. Put here, if you will, Hebrews 10:34. They took joyfully the spoiling of their goods. Hebrews 10:34. Number 4. That's Hebrews 10:34. Number 4. Being poor. And Greek students, patokos again, poverty. Being poor does not mean we're not rich. Boy, we are. Being poor does not mean we're not rich. In fact, we can enrich others. Verse 9. And put here 2 Corinthians 6:10. 2 Corinthians 6:10. As poor, yet making many rich. I love that. In your ministry, you're going to find that there are people that are fabulously wealthy, and you have the privilege of ministering to them, and they'll just thank you so much for what you've done in their lives. And that's true. You can be poor and yet make other people rich. Number 5. This church shows us how to suffer for Christ. This church shows us how to suffer for Christ. 3 things. Number 1, no fear. I think Christians should be wearing that T-shirt, no fear. No fear. Verse 10, do not fear what you're about to suffer. No fear, don't be afraid. That's my first response. You know, don't be afraid, just face it like a Daniel. Number 2, be faithful to death. Be faithful to death. Verse 10. And number 3, look to Christ. Look to Christ. Verse 8. That's why you have that description of Christ. The third church you're tough, you can take it. Remember, I'm from Hinckley, Minnesota, where the men are men and planters are flowers. All right, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum. We're moving up the coast here. Pergamum is a very interesting thing. The church is commended for its steadfastness. And here he talks about Satan's throne. Satan's throne is there. I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. Well, good night, students. Moving up the coast, Ephesus, Smyrna, and then Laodicea, and then Pergamum. All right. They recorded that. Okay, he says where Satan's throne is. The King James Version says where Satan's seat is. You got to be careful about how you translate that. Where Satan's throne is. What is Satan's throne? Several suggestions. Number one, a huge altar to Zeus. Huge altar to Zeus on the Acropolis. If you ever go to Pergamum, you know there's an Acropolis that's kind of a cylindrical, or not cylindrical, but cone-shaped hill. And you go up there, and then finally the guy will say, there is the altar to Zeus. There's nothing there because it was carried away by archaeologists. I believe the altar to Zeus is in Berlin, much to the chagrin of the folk at Turkey. They like to get it back. But back when it was there, it was a huge altar, and on the side of the hill it looked like a throne. So they thought that that altar to Zeus on the side of the hill was it was a throne. It could be this. Secondly, the worship of Asclepius. I'll spell Asclepius for you in a second. The worship of Asclepius. Asclepius is spelled like this: capital A-E-S-C-L-E-P-I-U-S. Asclepius. Okay, does anybody know what the symbol of Asclepius is?
Yeah, he's the staff with the serpent.
Exactly. The mark of Asclepius is a staff with a snake wound around it, which is the sign of what profession? Medicine. That's right. Because at Asclepius, at Pergamum, there was a huge center for healing, which observed the worship of snakes. And that's the basis of our medical profession. It doesn't say much, does it? But it was, it was a center which worshipped snakes, and that was the medical center. Did you notice where this is? Notice where Pergamum is. Here's Pergamum, right here. Troas is right up here. Remember Paul's second missionary journey? Whom did he pick up at Troas? On his second missionary journey, be a traveling partner. Dr. Luke. And some people feel that Pergamum is so close that he somehow had contact with Paul at Troas because he heard Paul was there. We don't know, but some people thought that Luke practiced at Pergamum, and that may be. So there could be the worship of Asclepius. Some take that to be. And there's still, you can still see ruins of that, I don't want to call it a hospital, but a center. The third suggestion, that the throne of Satan is emperor worship. The majority take this, and here's why. The first city in Asia, I'm talking about the province of Asia, the first city in Asia to erect a temple in honor of Rome and the emperor was Pergamum, the first city in Asia to erect a temple in honor of Rome and the emperor was Pergamum. The date, 29 BC to Augustus. Furthermore, this fits with the concept of a throne. The throne, the emperor worship, could look at a throne. So it's possible that, and I don't know which it is, but if I were preaching on it, I'd give these very suggestions and say probably it's emperor worship. This is the throne, like the throne of a king, the throne of Satan, which of course on the day of Domitian would be the throne of Satan. It's exactly what it would be. It'd be catastrophic. The teaching of Balaam, a couple of quick things here. You have there some who hold to the teaching of Balaam. Put here, sin of corrupting by immorality and idolatry. The sin of corrupting by immorality and idolatry. You know the story very well. We've hit it several times. The sin of corrupting by immorality and idolatry. Put here, Numbers 25, 1-9, and 31:16. I am not sure what the next thing means at all. Verse 17, where he says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes, to him I will give of some of the hidden manna. I have no idea what the hidden manna is. And I just put in my notes, enigmatic, we don't know. But it may, if you have to do something here with it, so it may refer to fellowship with the Lord. May be fellowship with the Lord in eternity. I'll give the hidden manna, be fellowship with the Lord in eternity. Put here, John 8, 48-58. And that, of course, would be in contrast with the immorality and idolatry of Balaam. We don't know. We don't know. White stone, I'll give to him a white stone with a new name written on it. The white stone, a couple of interpretations, or in fact, there are many interpretations. Here are a couple. One is that it's a stone used in voting, meaning yes. A stone used in voting, meaning yes. You've all heard he blackballed me, which would be the same concept. You vote with a stone, would be white. You were against, it'd be black. So it'd be a stone meaning yes. Or secondly, it could be a stone with your name written on it. A stone with your name written on it, which would give privileges, such as entrance into the Cowboy football games, or be entrance into sporting events, or bread, something like this. It'd be a stone with your name written on it. Did you notice it's a new name? If you were ever sang in a men's quartet, you sang that song. There's a new name written down in glory in his mind. Every quartet used to sing that song. There's a new name written down in glory in his mind. Well, that's the next point. A new name probably means a new character and power. A new character and power given to you. Yeah, the new name probably would be a new character and power. The new name would stand for who you are. Remember, you have that in the Old Testament, and give you a new name that would indicate who the person was. Right, some lessons, 5 lessons. Number 1, you can hold to the truth in the midst of satanic power. You can hold to the truth in the midst of satanic power. Verse 13. And you hold fast my name and did not deny my faith, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one who was killed. You can hold to the truth in the midst of satanic power. Number 2, Balaam is a warning to all of us. Remember, he was religious. He's called a prophet of God, prophet of Yahweh. Amazing. Balaam is a warning to all of us. Put your 2 Peter 2:15, Jude 11, Revelation 2:14. Number 3. Please get this one, students. Please get this, because this is lost in today's churches, especially mega churches. Tolerance of evil in a church is wrong. Tolerance of evil in a church is sinful. You have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam, the Nicolaitans, and you're just permitting them to go on. Tolerance of evil in a church is sinful. Here are your references, chapter 2, verses 14-16, and then 1 Corinthians 5. You all know the story in 1 Corinthians 5, the terrible matter of incest. And did you notice Paul does not rebuke the couple for their incest? You know what he does? He rebukes the church because he did nothing about it. You're puffed up and not doing anything about it. Tolerance of evil in the church is sin. And yet people just go on and on. It really bothers me that the divorce rate in our church is about the same as in society, and immorality goes on all the time in our church, and we do nothing about it. People cheat. Well, don't give me a number four. God deals with unbelievers in a church. There are unbelievers in the church. God deals with unbelievers in a church. Notice them in verse 16. I will make war with them. Just notice them, verse 16. Obviously talking about these apostates. See further verse 6, verses 14 to 15. Number 5. A proper view of Christ is a key to discipline in the church. A proper view of Christ is a key to discipline in the church. Verse 12. The one who has the sharp two-edged sword says this. And verse 16. Repent therefore, else I'm coming to you quickly, and I'll make war against them with the sword of my mouth. Put here as well, Hebrews 4:12. A proper view of Christ, when we recognize who Christ is. All right, the church at Thyatira. The church at Thyatira. As the notes say, this is the smallest town of the 7 cities. It has the longest letter, amazingly. While this church was noted for many noble qualities, it failed because of its tolerance of theological and moral errors. In fact, it not only tolerated, in some cases, it propagated the error. You'll notice in verse 20, they propagated it. Now, he says in chapter 2, verse 20, well, let's start with verse 19. I know your deeds, your love and faith and service and perseverance, that your deeds of late are greater than at the first. But I have this against you, you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess. She teaches and leads my bondservants astray, so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. In verse 22. Behold, I will cast her upon a bed of sickness, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, unless they repent of her deeds. The question is this the great tribulation? And I don't think it's the great tribulation for a couple of reasons. I don't think it's the great tribulation for a couple of reasons. Number one, no article. No, that's not strong proof, but it's an indication. No article. See further, 7:14. In 7:14 it has the article. See, Revelation 7:14 and Acts 7:11. Just throw them in great tribulation. Number 2, the second reason why I don't think it's a great tribulation. Except for 7:14, the word tribulation, thlipsis in the Greek, except for 7:14, tribulation is used of suffering in general in Revelation. This word is used of, except for 7:14, this word is used of suffering in general. I know your persecution, your suffering. And here are some references. Revelation, or just put chapter 1, verse 9, chapter 2, verse 9, and verse 10. The third reason, the penalties in verses 22 and 23 are immediate. They're immediate. Look what he says in verses 22 and 23. I'll cast her upon a bed of sickness, and those who commit adultery with her into great tribulation, and I will kill her children with pestilence, and all the churches will know. So it seems to be immediate rather than looking into the great tribulation. The fourth reason why I think he's talking about it is verse 23. All the churches will know. All the churches will know. But the argument is, and I'm assuming the pre-trib rapture here, the argument is that the church will not be in the tribulation. The church will not be in the tribulation. So the churches will know, and I don't think he's talking about the tribulation period. You might just want to notice here also in verse 24, they've not known the deep things of Satan. I don't have this in the notes, but the deep things of Satan. We aren't sure what that means. probably it would be the deeper teachings of dualism. This is a deep teaching, the flesh is evil, the spirit is the real, and the deep things of Satan would be that. It could be something like that. We're not sure what it really means. It'd be called deep doctrine. Verses 26 and 27, as you well know, clearly look at the millennium. Clearly the millennium. He overcomes, he who keeps my deeds until the end. To him I will give authority over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, the vessels of potter. That's clearly millennial. Put here Psalm 2, verses 7 to 8. Psalm 2, verses 7 to 8. That's clearly looking ahead to the millennium. He will reign with Christ. I'm going to take you're still groggy, so let me just take a quick bypath here. I don't like to do this because of time, but you need it. Sometimes you'll see for a missionary conference, the church will have a banner across the front of the church. Ask of me, and I'll give the nations for your inheritance. They use that for a Psalm 2, and that's the great missionary passage. Ask of me, I'll give you the nations for your inheritance. They don't take the next verse, I'll dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. It's not very good for a missions. It's not very good. But this is clearly looking ahead to the millennium. All right, verse 28 says, I'll give him the morning star. What in the world does that mean? Two different ideas, two different suggestions. Number one, 22:16. Jesus is called the morning star. Therefore, we look at fellowship with Christ. I'll give him the morning star. Jesus is the morning star, and so it'd be fellowship. Put here 2 Peter 1:19. 2 Peter 1:19. The second idea is, in the kingdom we will shine as stars. Giving them the morning star, and so we'll shine like stars in the kingdom. It fits with the idea of ruling with Christ. I would prefer this. It fits with the idea of ruling with Christ. You may remember Daniel 12:3. They will shine as stars. Daniel 12:3. And Matthew 13:43. Matthew 13:43. So there's the church at Thyatira. I better say just a quick word about this, because you'll see this when you start to study this. You ought to know that I don't know where to put this in, but at Thyatira, there were trade guilds, something like trade unions. You couldn't buy or sell, do business, unless you were part of these guilds. Each guild had a god, and in order to participate in these guilds, you'd have to worship those gods, and that may be involved in this city as well. Right, here are some lessons for our lives. Number one, the presence of error is not necessarily a hindrance to godliness, to personal godliness. The presence of error is not a necessary hindrance to personal godliness. Tremendous combination in verse 19. Your deeds, your love and faith and service and endurance, your deeds are increasing. The presence of error, tremendous error. Remarkable commendation. Number two, and I know you've noticed this one, if you're observing it all, false doctrine often involves immorality. Have you ever noticed that? So often, false doctrine goes with immorality. Have you ever wondered where bigamy came from in the Mormon church? Huh? False doctrine often involves immorality. Verses 20 to 22. Number three, false doctrine has no concern for loyalty to God. No concern for loyalty to God. Verse 20. She teaches and leads my bondservants astray so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. That's where the trade guilds could come in. They eat things sacrificed to idols because each trade guild would have an idol. Each trade guild would have its god, In order to participate in the business, you'd have to do this. So it could be that. See for the 1 Corinthians 10, 20 to 22. I better stop here too. There's a point that may be difficult for you to figure out, because it bothered me a great deal. When he talks about eating things sacrificed to idols, remember this? Do you see any conflict with Paul in 1 Corinthians chapters 8 through 10? Yeah, eat things sacrificed to idols. There's no problem with that. Eat what's set before you, asking no question. Just buy it in the marketplace, eat it. No problem. But when you come to chapter 10, that's why I put 1 Corinthians 10 here. When you come to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, don't you dare go into that idol's temple and eat food in that idol's temple, because then you're worshiping with the people in the worship of the false idols. So I take it that when John talks about eating things sacrificed to idols, he's not just talking about meats bought in the marketplace. Or I don't think he's just talking about somebody invites you over for a meal and they've bought the meat in the marketplace and it's been offered an idol. What he's talking about is you're going into that idol's temple and worshiping that idol in that idol's temple. So that's the only way you can reconcile it. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem reconciling Paul with John. So eating things sacrificed to idols probably refers to eating things sacrificed in the temple. Number four, a key to dealing with false doctrine is to see who Christ is. A key to dealing with false doctrine is to see who Christ is. Did you notice the description of Christ here? Boy, I tell you, it's powerful. Verse 18. To the angel of the church in Thyatira write, or to the messenger of the church in Thyatira write, the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire and his feet are like burnished bronze. I mean, that's judgmental. So a key to dealing with false doctrine is to see who Christ is.